that, I will begin the meeting. There is no public question, no public questions to deal with. So I'll call the meeting to order and look to the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? In which case, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We have no delegations. I'm looking to the minutes of April 3rd, regular meeting of council. Are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving right along to item F1, the Supplementary Assessment Bylaw 2018-07. Ms. Van Kuympema.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. This is my annual event at the last meeting before May 1st with two items. The first item being the Supplementary Assessment Bylaw. So the Municipal Government Act requires that in order for us to assess properties that get completed during 2018, the amount of taxes for their completed building for the period of time that they've occupied it during 2018. We have to actually pass a supplementary assessment bylaw before May the 1st, and this is what I'm seeking this evening. So I'm asking for first, second, and third readings for a supplementary assessment bylaw 2018-07, and I would welcome any question you might have.
But that was very comprehensive report. You've been coached by Mr. Fark, haven't you? No, you're right. This comes along every year, and it's always pretty straightforward. But if there are any questions from members of council, now's a good time to ask them. And I don't see any questions, so thanks for your presentation. So to speak. So then, with that, I'll move the council give first reading to Supplementary Assessment Bylaw 2018-07. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council give second reading to the Supplementary Assessment Bylaw 2018-07. Discussion. Seeing none, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council approve going to third reading of the bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll then move the council give third reading of supplementary assessment bylaw 2018-07. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And we'll move right along then to item F2. Again, Ms. Van Kuympema. On the downtown BRZ tax rate bylaw 2018-08.
So this is another one of the bylaws that have to be passed before May 1st of each year. And actually we don't have a choice, because in this case it says because you have a downtown business revitalization zone, you must pass a bylaw in order to collect the fees that are related to that. So this evening, and also another thing that's required by the Municipal Government Act is council actually has to approve the BRZ's budget. So council did that in December of 2017, but a third requirement of the legislation is that the revenue from the levies per budget must match what you actually levy. And so once all of the information is in, the BRZ board put together the assessment roll. That's what you see in Schedule A to the bylaw. And when you added that all up, the budget anticipated collecting $104,400. The actual assessment roll added up to $103,550. Therefore, there is a requirement the council actually has to approve the amended budget so that the budgeted levies equal what we're actually going to be collecting. So that's why there's the two-part. One is to get council to approve the budget, and then the next part this evening we're looking for first, second, and third reading for the bylaw that allows that levy to be assessed on the properties. You do have some alternative analysis that was given by administration. You could choose to amend the budget. We're not recommending that because the board's approved the budget. It matches the levy calculations, the calculations were done in accordance with the set out procedure and the numbers for doing so. And council could also choose to defeat the bylaw, but if that's the case, then we can't levy any assessments, which means in effect the BRZ would not be able to operate in 2018. With that, I would welcome any questions that you might have.
I was just going to note the error in your opening statement, but you corrected it yourself. We don't have to approve the bylaw.
Exactly.
If we want the BRZ to continue, then we should.
Correct, yes.
I have only one question, and it's pretty much the same question I ask every year, and I'll rephrase that. There's a similar question I have every year, and it relates to the actual attachment, this document. It shows the breakdown in levies, and it's a little complicated, and I wondered if some point we'd be able to have an overview for council or something that helps make sense of this. And I'll just give an example, for instance, on the what is that Schedule A called? Schedule A. So when you look at tax roll 10403, it's shown to be 975 square feet, and the tax rate levy is 4,700. And yet down the roll to 11,088, there's that tax roll is assessed, or there's 11,492 square feet, and the levy is only $1,000. So it's hard to understand why a small space of 975 square feet would be levied almost 5,000, and a unit that's more than 10 times bigger is charged a quarter. And I don't actually expect a fulsome answer right now.
Well, what I was going to say is that these are the numbers that were provided by the BRZ. If you're looking for an answer this evening, and not to put Ms. Vandervoort on the hot seat, but she might be in a better position to answer that question. Sorry.
She doesn't look like she's... Thank you.
So I'll show you what he was referring to.
Oh, yeah, I know. I'm trying to see which business it was.
Yeah, well, they're both Glacier Holdings, so, you know, I get it. There's a lot of space in play.
So I'm trying to think of, I don't have the 718 Main. I'm trying to think of where it is.
Yeah, you know, it's not really critical for this decision this evening. I'm comfortable moving ahead and approving the bylaw.
So sometimes what it is depends on the actual square footage that is occupied at the time, how much of it is occupied. So I'd have to go back and look at these two particular, you know, street addresses and see what it was. But I can get back to you personally on that. Yeah,
that'd be great. If you could just follow up with an email helping
and I think
understand.
Councillor Mara asked this morning at our board meeting regarding whether or not it was the full square footage of the building that was represented here, because then there's common space, et cetera, et cetera. So if it's a mall, you know, and then there's only part of it is, you know, actually occupied as commercial lease space. We only do the commercial lease space. We don't do the common area. So that's another thing that takes away from the square footage that we can charge against.
Right. Okay, yeah, thank you. I didn't want to put you on the spot at all.
No, that's
just
fine.
Every year I'm curious by aspects of that, of Schedule 1, and one day I'll understand it. I don't think there's any questions from council for Ms. Van Kuympema. Seeing none, thanks very much.
Thank you.
That I'll move the council approve the BRZ's amended 2018 budget. So discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move now that council give first reading to bylaw 2018-08, the Downtown Business Revitalization Zone, BRZ tax rate bylaw. So discussion on the motion. Seeing none, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Now move the council give second reading to bylaw 2018-08. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. I'll seek leave from council to go to third reading of bylaw 2018-08. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And then I will move the council give third reading to bylaw 2018-08, the downtown business revitalization zone BRZ tax rate bylaw. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. We're ripping right along here. Moving on to item G1. This is where we may bog down a little bit. Ms. DeSoto, you have.
Thank you, Your Worship. We are awaiting the arrival of Mr. Staple, and so I'm wondering if Council would agree to move to item G2, Waste Management Center solar power installation, and Mr. Simon Robbins is here to present that.
I'll move Council amend the agenda to reflect that change. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. It's all yours. It's a secret password. Secret.
Good afternoon. I'm here to speak with Council about the solar installation at the Waste Management Center. So we're requesting a decision today from Council to proceed with the project, the previously approved capital project, the solar installation at the Waste Management Center, but we need to make you aware of a longer payback period than was initially reported in the capital rationale. Just a summary of the project. So there was a study about the solar potential of town facilities. The Waste Management Center was identified as a good potential for a solar project. The project would be putting solar panels on the waste transfer side of the building. So just covering that whole section of the building with solar panels, and would produce about half of the energy needs of the Waste Management Center. So that's where we do all our recycling, sorting as well.
Do you mind if we interrupt with questions?
No, please do.
So I understand from previous conversation that this particular facility is deemed to be ideal for this application as opposed to some of our other facilities which may not be. Could you just speak to why this building is so well suited for solar panels?
Yep, because of the simple installation. So it's got a very large roof, doesn't have much tree shadowing, it's in the center of the valley. The panels will be just flat mounted on the roof, so there'll be no need to do any racking. So it's a simple project, that's why it was deemed optimal.
Simple location, lots of solar.
Exactly, big roof space.
Great, thanks.
In the capital rationale, it was stated that there'd be 11-year payback period, which is incorrect. And so that was based on a simple and incorrect calculation. So what I had done at the time was I divided our power bill in half, since we're producing half as much power as we need, but that's not how you do it.
Is this another mea culpa from one of your departments?
The calculation is a lot more complicated, obviously. So this was put together by the consultant that won the bid. And it estimates more of a payback more of 20 years for this project. And so a simple summary of this calculation is our power bill is made up of fixed charges and variable charges. The variable charges are the portion of power that we actually use. And so we would find savings in that variable portion. so not half our bill, obviously. Also in there, our facilities department has negotiated through an energy consultant really good energy prices for us, so that is detrimental to our payback. We don't pay much for energy, but it would take longer to pay back this project. And also in this calculation, there are built-in assumptions. So the assumptions of the efficiency that the system might lose over time, and also assumption on future energy prices. And so beyond 5 years, that's anyone's guess. So it's kind of a very gray area there. So another way to look at this project financially is that we would be locking in a portion of our energy in it as green energy. So we know the cost of the project, we know how much energy it would produce over roughly 30 years. So we'd be locking in that price for energy. This also brings us to the other lens of evaluating this project, and that other lens is environmental sustainability. This project would reduce Canmore's carbon footprint because we would be producing our own green energy, which is pretty simple. The project would be projected to save about 1,300 tons of greenhouse gases, and that's equivalent of taking about 277 cars off the road for a year. And then this project is funded through reserves. There'll be no debt taken on this project. The initial project budget was $208,000. After tendering, the actual cost is going to be $119,000. We have applied for and been confirmed that we are getting funding of 25%, so grant funding of about $30,000. So the project's net cost would be roughly $90,000.
Just a quick question on that. In the original capital project budget sheet, so the difference between what we've now discovered or now you see as the likely actual cost from what was projected, which is quite a bit. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that when the capital project sheet was written, what changed between now and then?
Prices were based off the Civic Center project, and this is a larger system going into the Waste Management Center, so we increased the cost, and obviously it's quite a competitive business right now, and so the cost came in the bidders came in very aggressive with their bids.
Thank you.
So we could, the other options for this project is we could delay or we could cancel the project. Obviously, we'd be losing the advantages of producing our own green energy, and we would probably be losing the advantage of the 25% funding, which is not confirmed past this year that there'd be any more funding for this project. So administration is recommending that we continue with the project, and we're asking for council's approval to proceed. Are there any other questions?
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for your presentation. Mm-hmm. So the 20-year payback that we're anticipating, is that on the $119,000 investment, $208,000 investment, or the $89,000 investment?
That's on the $89,000 investment.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. That's all I had to ask.
I have no questions. Are there any questions from other members of council? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation.
You're welcome.
That then I will move the council approve proceeding with capital project 7042, the Waste Management Center solar power installation. And I'll note, well, a couple of things. I'll note that firstly, I always appreciate, I think council always appreciates when administration comes forward and says, well, oops, we made a small mistake somewhere. I'd much rather have that sort of understanding between council and admin than have admin wait until it all falls apart and it's too late. So, firstly, thanks for bringing this project back for another discussion, given the changed parameters. I'm still quite happy to support moving forward on the project. Recognize the payback period isn't quite as advantageous as we'd first imagined, but the report speaks to it, and we talk about it all the time. We do mean it and fully intend to show leadership as we can within environmental matters, and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is something that council and our community takes very seriously. These calculations are in a way, some of the calculations are based on guesswork of what future electricity rates are going to be, and I think we all know from current conversations in the province and across the country, I suppose, that electricity rates are quite likely to be going up, maybe more than we anticipate right now. So by the same token, I think reducing our need, our dependence on electricity from outside sources is well worth moving forward with. And that was a long roundabout way of saying I'll support the motion. And I'm happy to hear from other members of council to the motion. And if I don't see no further discussion, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And thank you for your presentation. So let's circle on back then to item G1, Municipal Benchmarking Initiatives, Mr. Staple.
Good evening, Your Worship and Councillors. I'm Don Staple from the Streets and Roads Department. I'm here to present the Roadways Benchmarking Report. This initiative began in 2012. Several municipalities gathered in Banff and discussed collecting road data and ways to measure efficiencies and effectiveness of the services that we were delivering as municipalities. The early results were considered unreliable because of the various reporting methods used by the different municipalities at the time. Definitions were finally decided upon, and standard reporting measures were established to normalize our data across the board for all municipalities participating. Why benchmarking? Benchmarking makes good, sound business practice. It assists administration, council, and members of the community to better understand how their municipality is performing over time and in relationship to other municipalities. It's telling the municipal story, or performance story, if you will. It identifies opportunities for change, supports results-based accountability. The initiative is an excellent example of the value obtained through collaboration by various Alberta municipalities. The report looks at two dimensions of service: efficiency and effectiveness. It also examines trends over time and gives us very comparable data to our other municipalities. An example of a effectiveness performance would be in roads in poor condition. An example of efficiency would be the cost of roads maintenance. And then the trending over time and provides a comparison against other municipalities. The municipalities currently participating in the roads benchmarking are the cities of Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, and the towns of Banff, Canmore, and Okotoks.
That's in this particular benchmarking study,
Yes.
right? But there's
This
other
is
municipalities that have taken part in other of our benchmarking studies?
correct.
Thank you.
Roadway services, each community is rather unique and faces factors that impact their service deliveries. It could be population, it could be growth, it could be geography, and the local cost of doing business all impact those costs. Road services provide affordable, well-managed, safe transportation routes that affect our community's economies, vitality, and the quality of life for its residents. Highlighted right here are 3 of the 9 areas that were examined. They include total transportation costs for the system, operations costs, and traffic control costs. An example of traffic control would be signage, traffic lights, contracted services when used to maintain all of that. It also includes railway crossing maintenance fees, and Canmore has 6 of those. Each one of them has fees attached to it and maintenance costs attached to it. So that also impacts our overall costs. This slide is a narrative of all the factors that went into establishing a lane kilometer base cost and compares this to other municipalities. 2 primary factors influence roadway services. It's the size of the system. So, for example, the number of miles of road or kilometers of road within a municipality. And the age of the infrastructure and the frequency of maintenance that it requires. Those are 2 fairly large impactors on our costs. A lane kilometer can be defined, and we have finally established this for the report, as a measure, 1 lane in a kilometer times the number of lanes on the street. So, for example, portions of Railway Avenue are 4 lanes, whereas portions of Main Street, and all of Main Street, in fact, are 2 lanes of travel. That's the definite definition, if I can say that. It's the travel lanes, not the parking lanes or the curb lanes. When comparing our costs, it's very important to focus on each municipality's total lane kilometers in their community. And quite honestly, it's the economies of scale that are at work here in the background. As we'll see once we get further in, Canmore costs are average per lane kilometer when you compare them to other communities. Roadway system total costs. This slide shows the total cost per lane kilometer for all of the participating municipalities over the years 2012 through 14. Canmore is highlighted in the black box. They're arranged from the lowest, the city of Lethbridge, to the highest, our neighbors to the west, Banff. It's a 3-year average, and that's the red line. It's about $13,000 per lane kilometer. Canmore is below that average. The yellow bars are traffic control costs. The gray bar is sidewalk maintenance costs. The green bar is operations costs per lane kilometer. The blue bars are maintenance costs. And as a theme that trends throughout this initiative, the blue bar is the sole largest component of overall costs for all municipalities. What I've done here is I've taken that previous slide and isolated it down to just Canmore over the 3 years. As I said, it's a 3-year snapshot of what's going on. In Canmore, our costs are inching up, but in reality, it's about $200 in 2013 and $375 in the year 2014. Again, the gray bar is sidewalks. The green bar are operating costs. It includes street sweeping, pavement marking, maintenance, contracted costs, labor, wages, and benefits, and capitalized amortization. The blue bar, again, are our maintenance costs. It's pavement repairs, inspections, gravel laneway maintenance, and in general, it represents our largest single component for costs. This is a comparison for all communities in the year 2014. The average is the red line again. It's $14,652 for the group. It goes from Lethbridge at the lower end of the scale to Banff at the higher end of the scale. Again, the blue bar, our maintenance costs, are significant. It's interesting that Canmore has the second lowest number of lane kilometers. Banff is at the far end and has far less than we. So it's interesting how that plays out on the graph here. Again, the gray bars are sidewalk maintenance costs. The green are operations, and the yellow is traffic control costs. Cost per capita per lane, or yes, cost per capita. So this is the cost per capita for 2014 only for all of the groups reporting. The red line average is about $193 across the board. Canmore per capita costs are lower than the others. And in fact, we are on the low end of the scale. It's a good news story. We had higher overhead costs, which is the yellow bar, and lower than average amortization costs. What I should note here is that the overhead costs are all operating costs to keep the whole municipality functioning. And they're not necessarily directly related to the delivery of streets and roads services. So it's everything that keeps the community functioning. And these costs are included in this. Operation costs. So this is for activities that maintain roads, parking lots, and municipalities. And I should mention that they did include parking lots beginning in this slide. Municipalities, again, are in order from the lowest to the highest. The red line is the average group costs per lane kilometer, $1,692. The average, Canmore is the highest. We have a smaller lane kilometer footprint, which pushes us in that direction. Our overhead costs, the yellow bar, are significant. And again, it includes all the operating costs of activities necessary for the continued functioning of the municipality as a whole. These could include human resources, IT, security, policing, engineering, planning and financial services, council costs and administrative costs, and tax-funded debt tax-funded debt interest are also included in these. Our blue bar, which is our direct cost, is slightly higher. The green bar is very marginal. And the gray bar is amortization costs on the top end of the bars.
So on that particular chart, what stands out for me anyways is the most noticeable difference between the results for Canmore and the other communities is within the yellow or overhead costs. And if I understand from the written report, that factor of simply the fact that many of the other communities contract out a lot more of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So could you just speak to that briefly in relation to this chart? So how is that affecting this particular metric?
We do contract out, but not to the extent that other smaller municipalities would. And our maintenance cost, the blue one, is pushing the high end.
So the overhead costs include all of those peripheral things that you mentioned, including things like part or a portion of HR and the finance department and council and everything else. And those don't factor into the other communities because it's all handled by the contractor?
That, and they have the resources within their roads area that would manage a lot of that to begin with. For example, engineering costs. Some larger communities have an engineering department within the roads group. So those costs would be captured there rather than municipal-wide, is in this case of smaller communities. Is that?
Well, in one way or another, the work has to be done by somebody. Yep. And in our case, it's spread around. But even if it's within the same department, it's the same volume of work, I would assume, that's required. And I'm trying to understand, for the sake of the benchmarking, if a service is contracted out by another community, why that still wouldn't be reflected in the results? Those additional, payroll costs and HR management costs. I mean, that would have to be a cost to the contractor or the company that is contracted to.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do some digging and provide you with a better answer.
Okay, thank you. Just curious. Maybe, Mr. Como, do you have off the top of your head an answer?
Yeah, just
sorry, didn't see that.
yes, sorry, if I could just maybe add to Mr. Staples' explanation. So what you'll notice is the town of Banff, similarly to us, have a higher cost. And that is largely to do with we have less kilometers to space that, the overall cost, the total cost over less kilometers. Okay. The other piece around the amortization, the overhead costs from a contracted service is it wouldn't show up because it's not our overhead costs. It wouldn't show up under overhead. It would show up under direct costs. That's where we would capture it. So it should still be captured. It's just going to be in another pocket. The overhead costs from a contracted service.
Won't show up on the benchmarking?
It will under direct costs.
I see. Okay. Still don't quite get it, but that's okay. We can have further. I mean, the work has to be done. So,
yeah.
So this would suggest that if we contracted all those services, our overall costs would go way down. But that's not what.
That's not the case. And the thing is, with the contracted services, we don't get a cost breakdown of what the unit rates are. What a portion is to amortized and profit margins and so on. So we just have the total cost with no detail on how it's broken down. and it is captured in the blue portion of this table under direct costs. Whereas if we deliver the services, we would know what our overhead costs are, and then that would be captured under the green portion. But both costs should be captured. It just would be in a different box to ensure that we had a total price per lane kilometer, so we could do a fair comparison.
Okay. Mr. Fark, you had something to add?
So the only addition to that is that, because as Mr. Como suggests, how the contractors capture it is different than how we capture it by having it in-house. The easiest summary is to state that regardless of how you break down the costs, our service delivery is at least as efficient and as cost-effective as our comparatives, and in most ways we are, in fact, on the lower end of the cost spectrum. So it's simply because we are capturing it in different ways does not indicate that when we look at the actual total cost that we are less efficient because we are doing the work in-house.
Okay. I won't beat this one into the pulp. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Staples.
Not at all. Thanks for the clarification. Traffic control costs is the next slide, and it also includes parking lots in this case. Again, the average is the red line, $1,688. Our direct costs are gradually declining, as you can see over time there. Not significantly, but they are dropping. Our overhead costs are above average and the main influencing factor in this slide. And again, it's the cost of maintaining the municipality, keeping it in a functioning condition that are driving a lot of this bar. Sidewalk costs, we are slightly below average. The group mean average is about $3,700 or $3,700. I guess that's closer to 38. This is the cost to keep all sidewalks assets within the road right-of-way in an acceptable and usable condition. Some of the costs directly represented here are inspections, minor defect repairs, and contracted costs to replace whole sections of sidewalk when necessary. The gray bar is our amortization rates. And explaining Banff on the far right is that Banff undertook significant projects in 2013 and 14 that pushed up their direct costs. So that was streetscape and sidewalk improvements. Contracted costs, and this does not include snow and ice. This is strictly for the road services area. The average cost is the percentage, pardon me, it's displayed in percentages, is the red line again. It's about 31% across the board for the whole group. And it ranges from 18% in Lethbridge to 51% in Banff. We are slightly below the average in this slide. The 3-year Canmore average, if you did the math, is about 22% for contracted costs. A good news story, road conditions in poor shape. We are low, well below the 16% average, and we are declining. And this story is really representative of all of the road and rehabilitation work that was done in South Canmore during these reporting years, 2012, 13, and 14. Okotoks is an interesting story. They had never done a road assessment or inspection for quality. And they did their first one in 2014, and they came in at 3%. General learnings from benchmarking. Finalized the definition of a lane kilometer to include only traffic lanes and excluding parking lanes. I'll say that again. They defined a lane kilometer. This took multiple meetings and multiple discussions with all of the municipalities participating. It's a good example how originally we were all comparing apples to mangoes. I'm happy to say that we are now on the apples to apples measure. Thank you. We've standardized definitions, and all municipalities revised this report many times to ensure its accuracy and making future reporting much faster and quicker. Going forward into the future, we're going to include sidewalk condition data, which is now currently not being done. It'll add another efficiency measure to the future reports, and collect data on total capital spending per a road's square kilometer. So what we're interested in finding out here is the capital costs and how they're going for rehabilitation projects and how they're going to impact our maintenance costs over time. And obviously we are anticipating that they will decline over time. So going back to the blue bars, it should see a story being told there. Next steps, review practices and seek efficiencies where possible. And add the 2015 to 17 data and create the next report.
Questions?
Yes.
Great, I have a few. I wrestled with whether to interrupt your presentation. I thought it would be easier in the long run for me to just kind of work my way back through from the beginning of the printed report. And other councillors as well. If anybody has a question, just poke your button. So one of the questions is just sort of general curiosity. So in the participating municipalities, as you've noted, there were a number of municipalities that weren't involved in this benchmarking that have been in other of the benchmarking exercises, and I'm just curious why that is. If anybody knows the answer.
Some of the municipalities removed themselves from the roadways benchmarking because of the time and the resources that were needed to provide the data. They felt they just didn't have that resource available to them, and they couldn't provide appropriate data for the report. So for that reason, they've withdrawn from it.
Bless you. So is this this particular benchmarking initiative more complex, do you know, than some of the others?
It appears to have been, given the fact that it's 2018 and we're presenting the report now for 2012 through to 14. I think speaks to how complex and difficult it was to get everybody to agree on what a lane kilometer was, what was included in the road right-of-way, was it parking lanes, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, we've got it started now, so it'll be good in moving forward. And I guess just to that point, given that this is data from 2012 through 2014, which shows very positively for our operation, would your guess be that the next 3 years of data will reflect similar comparison to the other municipalities' work?
Yes.
Has there anything changed dramatically since 2014?
Yes. Okotoks is going to be, to use Okotoks as an example, they had huge grant funding available to them in 2014, I believe it was, which they injected into the road systems. So we're going to see a significant shift in theirs in comparison to ours. But as we add rehab projects, continue to dial in on the costs involved, I do believe that it's going to be a favorable.
Yeah, but we're not anticipating our own cost per traffic lane kilometer to change dramatically since this study was done?
No, not in the next 3 years.
If Council may remember, what we may not see in 15 and 16, but certainly in 17 and so on, is the addition of additional funds I think I can't recall the exact number, but I think it's around the $250,000 mark that we'll be reinvesting in road maintenance. So we should start to see our direct costs start to go up. The benefit of that will be is our percentage of road condition, poor condition, should continue to drop down.
Great, yes, of course. Councillor Comfort.
Thank you for your presentation. So I guess I have a kind of an overall question. Has this exercise been useful? I know a tremendous amount of time and energy has been put into this effort, and there were some false starts at the beginning for numerous municipalities, but it still seems to be something that is considered to be worthwhile. So I'm just wondering what admin's assessment of this process is. Does it inform how we do business, how we collate results, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. I believe that the initial startup was, I'll use the word painful, but we're past that now. We have very accurate data. It may be just isolated to the Canmore performance story, and I do believe that within our own community that's going to be very, very beneficial, has been and will be going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Staple. It seems that Banff and Canmore are the two smallest municipalities, and looking through the report and looking through the graphs, our numbers are generally, I mean, we're, in terms of distance, we're about 2.5 times what Banff is in roads, but we're still really small, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not enjoying the economy of scales that the bigger municipalities are enjoying.
No, we're not.
And so our numbers look relatively high, but if we compare to each other,
yes.
You know, to me that's a better comparison in some ways, because neither of us enjoys that economy of scale.
It would be very beneficial if there were more municipalities actually involved in the reporting. It would give us a broader base with smaller, larger road lane kilometers to average those numbers out on. And I think it would enhance the picture, but we are dealing with Banff and us, Okotoks.
So when our numbers look really high,
yes,
the comparators are very different than the
correct.
Rest of us.
Yeah.
And are you, and can you learn something from those larger comparators?
Yes, we can, because we can drill down into it. Banff, Canmore, and Okotoks, they're not exactly the same. There is quite a discrepancy at about 200 kilometers of roadway for Okotoks, but we can drill down into it and establish some commonalities that are across the board for all of us in that small group.
Yes, and just not taking these numbers at face value, because
correct, and that's
comparisons are
that's
really
why at the beginning I didn't specifically mention that the lane kilometers, the road network size is a major influence in this reporting.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's interesting data for sure.
Yes.
So hopefully it helps you.
It
Thanks.
does, yeah.
I have a question in regards to the information on page 35 of the report. Roadway layers useful life. And I'm just curious why many of the municipalities have numbers reflecting useful life of the top layer, the middle layer, and the base layer, but some of the municipalities don't have any data on middle layer, and there must be a reason why they're not assessing the useful life of middle layer. And in fact, back up a little bit, wouldn't hurt if you helped me understand the difference between base layer, middle layer, and top layer. What are we talking about exactly?
Okay, so the top layer of a road consists of, may I use inches?
Sure.
4 to 6 inches, that's the top layer.
So when we repave benchlands, for instance, is that the top layer that is repaved, or?
Benchlands that we're going to repave, yes. That'll be approximately, I'm sorry, I'm sliding back and forth from metric here. That'll be approximately 40 millimeters deep. Just to help understand, they're going to mill out the top layer, not all of it in this case, and then repave it.
So in that particular project, we'd be taking off some of the top layer, but not all the top layer.
Correct.
We wouldn't be getting into the middle or base layer.
A little bit of history. Benchlands Trail was micro-sealed many years ago, and it was literally this much.
Yeah, I remember.
And that's what's coming apart and needs to be replaced. So again, the 40 mils is coming off and a new top layer. But going back to your question, so you have the upper layer, the top layer. You have the mid layer, which is your base coat of asphalt, and typically much thicker and a rougher, coarser layer of asphalt. Below that is the sub base, which is typically road crush or gravel. And depending on the area that it's in and the road ground conditions that they're working with, it can be quite deep. Below that is the sub base, or the base, if I could say it that way. And again, depending on the road ground conditions that you're working in, it can be substantial. So for example, Spring Creek Drive going in, that was rehabbed last fall, that sub base is very significant because of the water conditions. Yeah.
So the municipalities, specifically Lethbridge and Medicine Hat and Red Deer, all the bigger municipalities in the study, don't have any data on the useful life of the middle layer. Is that just because they haven't done the work to analyze it?
They probably don't consider it to be captured in the, whether it was a 40-year lifespan or a 50-year lifespan.
But generally, we're collecting it because it's helpful information? It's interesting information to see how communities As in,
compare.
That's interesting. That kind of
It invites questions, that's for sure.
yeah. Certainly did for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll take that really as just one of those questions that are, Another sort of general question on page 40 of the report. It's in the definitions manual, and under 3.2, the definitions of costs. 3.2.1, maintenance direct costs, excludes things like cleaning and sweeping and flushing and marking pavement and maintenance. And that's all, but that is, it's included, it's reflected in 3.2.2, operation direct costs. I guess I'm wondering why that would be in operations versus maintenance. I mean, what's the difference between those two components, maintenance versus operations direct cost.
So the driver behind that, in most of these definitions, was the collective agreement of the municipalities involved. Initially, everybody was capturing it under different headings, and to try and answer the question, these are the areas that everyone agreed to include those specific costs in.
I see. So it was sort of, was it arbitrary, or was there rationale?
I wouldn't say it was arbitrary. It was probably driven by the majority who were already doing it as described.
I see.
And some outliers who were not.
That would stand to reason. That's all the specific questions that I've made a note of myself. Are there other questions from members of council? Seeing none. Just sort of a general observation, I guess, more for council's future consideration, but given that the results of the benchmarking reflect that Canmore's really efficient and cost efficient in delivering that part of our service, and given that each year there's push from some elements of the community to deliver more service, just an interesting note that we could increase our service level and still compare, and there's a lot of room in the comparison. We could arguably increase service delivery level, acknowledging that that means taxes may go up, but we would still be on a cost delivery basis performing well. And a big part of the value of the benchmarking that we're doing in general, Councillor McCallum will recall from the beginning of these conversations, but it's not unusual for questions to be asked both from our perspective and the municipal or community perspective about, how do we know that what we're doing is the best way of doing it, or how do we know that we couldn't do it better for less, or so the benchmarking helps us answer those questions, or helps reassure the town that we are being efficient in how we deliver various service aspects. So just kind of for myself, I guess, future consideration is, well, just that. I won't go over it again. But we're doing pretty well there, and there's a little bit of room maybe to increase cost per kilometer mile and still be comparing well. But if there are no other questions or long rambling comments, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Staples, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Each one of these benchmarking reports has been really interesting and well worth waiting for. Mm-hmm. So thanks to everybody for taking this on and the work that's required to complete the benchmarking studies.
I'm going to look forward to bringing the snow and ice report.
Yeah, I think that'll be really interesting. Yeah, when do you think that'll be coming?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I'm not quite sure, but it should be fairly imminent. I know that it's been finished and ready to go.
Perfect. Well, we'll look forward to that.
Right.
As soon as we get rid of all the snow and ice outside, then we can talk about it.
Thank you.
All right, then. Where are we? We've done that. G3. Whew. Wow. Item G3, 2018 Land Use Bylaw. And who's presenting.
I thought there was the waste management.
Oh, I guess. Usually he's sitting out there in his office watching our meetings, so he's on top of it. Of course. You're right. Mr. Prevost. I wondered if maybe you were sitting out in your office having a hard time thinking about coming in for this presentation, given the disappointing news. You know, maybe you just didn't have it in you to emotionally to present to council tonight. But here you are, so that's not the situation.
Part of me hoped my personal life wouldn't be talked about publicly on YouTube, but I'm happy to go into it.
Fair point.
But with that, good evening.
With that.
So I'm Lee Prevost with the town's planning department, for anybody watching and wants to Google what I'm talking about. And I'm going to give you just an overview of our 2018 Land Use Bylaw timeline and the initial community public engagement that we're going to do. So we're working towards an 8-month time frame to bring recommendations to council for final reading. The project will begin at the start of May with a 6-week initial community engagement session, which is intended to introduce the topics that are under consideration for revision as part of this new bylaw. We expect to present a staff report with draft recommendations for first reading in July. And we've purposefully chosen a tight timeline up front because we want to have plenty of opportunity to gather stakeholder feedback on the changes we make and propose to council. To support that, we've also built in 3 months from August to October for a public hearing and another tailored stakeholder engagement. And if it's determined that we're making significant changes to what we propose for first reading, to council for first reading, we've included time for a second public hearing and more engagement so that we're sure we understand how stakeholders are going to be impacted. That will leave us a couple of months at the end of the year to consolidate the changes into a final bylaw and bring them for second and third reading at council. And like other projects, we're open to adjusting our timeline based upon the feedback that we receive. So part of our role in planning is to align the land use bylaw to direction that's provided by the municipal development plan. And as part of our review, we've identified about 20 individual topics that are on the table for updating. In many instances, those topics don't exist in silos, but when we make changes to one, we can impact several others. So for that reason, we're going to group the topics into relevant themes that are focused on activating public spaces, improving access to housing, refreshing the design, form, and function of the buildings, and updating the land use districts that address public areas. Theming also has one more benefit in that it could simplify understanding of the land use bylaw. And we're choosing this format in an effort to spur a broader participation in the discussions we'll have with the community. So this slide will give you an example of how broad the range of topics we're looking at is, but also how they can be linked together. When it comes to promoting dynamic street life, for instance, we want the discussion around activating new spaces to also consider how parking might be impacted, how signage is being used, and how the transportation network might need to evolve. With housing, we recognize that there are links between employee housing, tourist homes, visitor accom, bed and breakfast. We want feedback on what's important, how residents are impacted, and what areas we might improve upon. For something like development, architectural design choices can have impacts on roof heights, privacy, building massing. We want to understand where our bylaws can be improved so that both neighbors and developers have a reasonable expectation of what the outcomes will be and how we will review their applications, regardless of the design choices that they make. And lastly, we see where some of the uses that are currently allowed in our public space districts may not necessarily be delivering the intent of those districts, so we want to update them. I think what might be most important about using this format for community engagement is that it's going to allow stakers to sort of choose their own adventure. They can provide feedback kind of on the topics that they're interested in, as many or as little as they like. So for our program, we're going to focus on 3 particular tactics: an online survey, sounding boards, and pop-up events. And we're choosing them specifically to attract a broader range of participation. We want to provide opportunities for those who are comfortable participating in public events, but also those who prefer anonymity. We're going to locate these in public spaces that are easily accessible and that are available outside of typical business hours. All of our tactics are going to use something like this, a topic card. We're going to use them to introduce the intent of the bylaw section being addressed and ask some form of question about how well the bylaw is delivering on that intent. We expect them to provide a reasonable level of information for stakeholders, enough so that they're able to provide us with meaningful feedback. And we're going to have a topic card for every item that is up for discussion, and we can add new ones as we gather feedback throughout this process. For those who are even more interested, we'll also have handouts that dive a little bit deeper into the discussion. For those instances, the handouts will go into specific detail about the existing regulations and how planning interprets the sections when we review applications. And whether a stakeholder is using the online survey or participating in a pop-up event or looking at the sounding board, they're all going to get the same information. So this is an example of what one of our web page for the online surveys might look like. We're going to start by introducing what we're doing, but then we're going to go into sort of an online version of those topic cards, so the vertical, colorful columns you see here. And when you click on the arrows on the end, you're going to be able to scroll through all of the topics so you can focus on specifically what you're interested in. There's also going to be, as you can see in the little white letter there, the click here to learn more button. And when you click on that, you're going to get the exact same information that was included in those deeper dive handouts for those who want more information. And lastly, anywhere you are in the website, you're going to have that dialog box where you can input your feedback at any time. So the second tactic we're going to use is going to be these sounding boards. We're going to set these up at the beginning of May and leave them up for the entire 6 weeks of the engagement session. We're thinking about 2 locations right now, Elevation Place and hopefully some part of Main Street. If not, probably up front here in front of the Civic Center on 7th Avenue. These are going to include the exact same information that's on the topic cards and in the deeper dive handouts. But they'll provide 24 hours a day access so that we can receive feedback from community members, and we'll use comment cards and a Dropbox to do so.
So those would be freestanding signs that would be placed on a semi-permanent basis in around the downtown? Is that what?
That's exactly right, yeah.
On a sidewalk or?
Well, hopefully on town land, sort of just stepped off a little bit. Yeah.
Huh.
The idea there is that, well, for the most of the typical tactics we use around open houses or online surveys, we target a specific demographic of people, but this is going to attract, well, hopefully this is going to attract a whole wide range. We've used these successfully on other projects, not here in the town, but sometimes we get the most diverse comments when we put up a board like this.
And I don't want to divert your presentation, but So given the whole current discussion on signage downtown and those issues, how will we place the signs in such a fashion that they're not in the way?
Right. I mean, similar to how we look at temporary signs or signage in the town core right now, we use the public space, the walking kind of area, we try to keep that clear. And so wherever we find this, it's going to have to be something that's off of the immediate, obvious pedestrian pathway, so just stepped off. Yeah. So these won't be in a place where they're going to impact flow of pedestrian traffic. Yeah. Be very hard for us to crack down on temporary signs and then go and put these up at the same time.
It would be. You're right.
Can I just add to Mr. Prevost's comments there? We don't know exactly where these are going to go. Obviously, we're sensitive to the exact issues that you're talking about. Mr. Prevost, when I talked earlier today, perhaps within Elevation Place would be a place where one of these would go. As Mr. Prevost talked about, the key is to try and get a little bit more of some diverse exposure to it. Yeah. I mean, inside the Civic Center would be easy, but it's largely a Monday to Friday business hours type place. So we would prefer to have an external location, but recognizing that it doesn't always have perfect weather in Canmore in the summertime. You know, we would like this up to be available for an extended period, not just a day or a couple of days. So we'll need to figure that out. So we are not thinking of putting this on an A-frame sign on Main Street. We'll have to try and figure out what the options are.
I didn't think so.
Yes.
No, I think it's a really interesting approach. I'm just trying to imagine it. Yeah.
I think it's important to note as well that this is for our initial engagement program, but if this is successful, we'll likely use it throughout this entire 2018 bylaw update. If we're getting a diverse group of comments there, we're going to want to put them up more than once.
We could do it for all of the 5 or 6 different engagements we're going to be running through on this year. Except, no, then we'll have way too many signs everywhere. We'll get into that later sometime. Sorry, keep going.
That's all right. And the last major tactic we're going to use will be pop-up events. We're going to put these up at things like the Mountain Market, which starts in May, probably along some street corners on busy weekends, and at other events that bring people together. So these are our tactics that we will take to where people go. Similarly, the topic cards and information handouts will be available, but these ones will also be staffed by our engagement crew so that they can stimulate discussion, respond to questions, and provide sort of a different level of feedback. We're also going to continue our regular consultation with groups like BODA, the Downtown Center Business District, and the Chamber of Commerce. And to support all of these engagement events, we're going to be advertising in the local newspaper, using the town website and social media, and we'll add some posters to community events boards throughout town. Together, all of the feedback that we're going to gather, we're going to use it to help draft that first set of recommendations for council at first reading. And we're hoping that this program is going to be effective at reaching a much broader range of stakeholders. And hopefully they'll also have sufficient information to give us some meaningful feedback that's going to help shape the new bylaw. So with that, we ask that council accept this information, except for information, our 2018 Land Use Bylaw briefing report. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. I really applaud the creative work that's gone into some of this planning. I think it's great that we're, particularly in these times, as I noted in my aside, so many different topics that we have to engage the community on. So, and when we've had conversations I have and council has with Ms. Denage in communications about how we might handle all of these various engagements, this is really a vibrant and eye-catching approach. I think that's good. You I think your report at some point said, oh yeah, under discussion you talk about wanting to lessen the potential for engagement fatigue. And I think that's not specific to the land use bylaw, but in general terms, something we have to have more discussion about, and I'm certain it's coming. I mean, I'm fatigued by the engagement that we have to manage through this next year. The land use bylaw is really important piece of work that we've been struggling to have accomplished for several years. So this is important, and I like the approach that you're taking to doing that part of the work.
Thank you.
I don't have any real questions. Does anybody else? What are you smirking about? If you'd like, I could come up with some questions or ramble a bit longer. You'll be happy I didn't go where I thought I might go in this report. Thanks very much for being here to present, and I don't think it needs a motion to accept. Do you want a motion on that? No.
No.
We accept the information.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you around the halls for a while.
I'll be at some of these engagement events.
Okay, perfect. And I think that pretty much does it. That I'll move the council be adjourned. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried. We're adjourned.